You've all seen the drag race where the Supra wins against the Z. And why is that? It all starts with this, the toy BMW B58 engine. It's rated at 382 horsepower, whereas the VR30 and the Z is rated at 400. And that means for every horsepower the Supra has to push around, it's got 8.9 pounds, while the Z has 9. So with an almost identical power to weight ratio, there's some other factors at play. No, it's not just grip. But first, let's look at the actual horsepower numbers compared to what the manufacturers tell us. This is a dyno graph from a 2021 Toyota Supra. This is from Car and Driver, where they tested it on a dyno jet. So on the left-hand side, we've got power. And on the bottom, across the bottom, we've got RPM. And on the right-hand side, we've got torque. So if you want to see what a value is, you just look it up in the line. So for example, if we look at the torque here, we're hitting maximum torque at around 2,800 RPM, and it's 421. You can see that sort of lines up with that side over there. I could actually just pull this down here. You can see where that is. And then if we look at the maximum power level, which is right about here at about 5,500 RPM, it's making 388 horsepower. Now let's compare this to a VR30 engine. So I'm going to add a little bit of green here and make this graph a little bit easier to read. This is from Stillen. This is from a Q50, which is right from the dealer. And this is in 2015 or so. So we're looking at the power curve here, looking at the torque curve. Here it looks like we're making maximum torque, which is about 349 pound-feet, somewhere right about here or so. You can kind of see that. And then we're making maximum power all the way over here, which is about 374 horsepower. So we looked at them side by side, and now we're going to compare them, but there's an important thing to remember. This is not a perfect comparison. When you're comparing vehicles, you really want to put them on the same dyno on the same day, so keep that in mind. But regardless of that, I think my point stands, and I'll show you that now. So this is the 21 Supra, the B58 engine. Now I'm going to overlay the green graph from the VR30. So now let's look at the differences. So here on the left-hand side, this is the torque curve, and we can see that the torque is pretty similar up to about 2,000 RPM, at which point they diverge. The Supra with the B58 keeps going, and it makes maximum torque somewhere around here at 2,800, about 421 pound-feet of torque, whereas the VR30 makes less torque, and it continues on its way all the way over here where it makes maximum torque somewhere around here. So you can see that the Supra is going to feel more torquey because it is. You've got more torque from about 2,000 RPM up until we get this crossover point where they start to feel similar. Now let's look at the horsepower. With the VR30, we've got more horsepower earlier on, and I think this is partly because it's got two smaller turbos that are spinning up, and these turbos are probably not quite as big as the output of the Supra turbo. And at about 2,300 RPM or so, we get a crossover, and now the Supra is starting to make more power, and it continues to make more power pretty much all the way through the rev band up to about maximum power is right around here. So it's making a similar amount of maximum power. They kind of meet over here, but this is what's called power under the curve. You can see that the Supra is going to feel better because it is just making more torque across here, across the rev band, and it's making more horsepower across this part of the rev band too. Let me show you what it looks like compared to a 2020. So the 21 Supra is in blue, and underneath I'm going to show you what the 2020 looks like. This is also from Car and Driver magazine. You can see that the 2020 is in red, and the difference here is that it makes torque earlier. It comes on about 200 RPM earlier, and it makes about the same amount of torque, but it happens earlier, and the engine actually feels more responsive because of that. But you can see once you get going here, the horsepower is better in the 21, and it continues to make more power, and quite a bit more power, about 47 more or so, right up here around 5,500 RPM. Now let's look at the 2020 versus the VR30. Same kind of story here. We've got the power curve, the torque curve of the B58, and you can see it makes more torque right away. The VR30 makes less torque, and ultimately when you get over here, it is making more horsepower than the B58, which is down here, but in terms of torque, it feels more torquey. Now there was a graph allegedly from AMS floating around the web that showed a dyno pull apparently between the new Z and a 2021 Supra. and that graph disappeared pretty quickly from all the forums, and I haven't seen it since. So I can't verify the authenticity of that graph. I don't know why it was pulled down, but it was pulled down for a reason, so I'm just going to leave that as it will. But I can tell you, I've seen the graph, and it actually looks very similar to what I've shown you here. And even though this chart is a little bit stretched out, and on the right-hand side the torque values don't match up perfectly, this is still a very good representation. This looks very much like the chart that I saw. This sort of illustrates my point. The engines feel differently. It is all about the power under the curve. Yes, that's the phrase of the day. So the way an engine delivers power is actually a huge factor in getting down a drag strip quickly. One of the other factors, of course, is grip. How much you've got. You want to be able to put down the power that your engine is making and not turn it into heat and smoke. A couple of things that affect grip. One of them is going to be the tires. Are you running snow tires? Are you running all seasons? Are you running drag radials? Also, the surface comes into play too. Depending how hot or cold it is, it's got to be the right temperature to give you the max amount of grip. The surface material, if there's dirt on it, like you're at an airstrip, you're going to have more dirt and sand on there too. And finally, if you're at a drag strip, you're going to have a prepared surface, and the starting line is going to have some special coating to help you put down that power. Now, the transmission is incredibly important too. In the Supra, you have the ZF8 HP, which is incredibly fast, can put down power very effectively. In the Nissan and the Z, you've got a Mercedes source unit, a 9-speed, which is just not quite as quick. I was the first person to drive the Supra against the Z back to back. If you want to see that video, click here. Thanks for watching.